Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Let me start by saying this is my very first real life mystery video, and I am determined to get it uploaded today despite my allergies that are wreaking havoc with my voice. So I hope you'll bear with me if I sound hoarse, gravelly, or phlegmy. I feel totally fine, but I may need to clear my throat or sip some water, and some of that may slip by the editor. Anyway, in today's video, we're going to explore the Twilight Zone case, which chronicles all sorts of twists and turns in the life of a woman named Anita Friend. Now, before we get started, I wanted to first say that with all the research I did on this case, I still find the timeline to be a little confusing. It seems like all this Twilight Zone stuff, we'll get there in a minute, was happening during our heroine's one-year lease from 2010 to 2011. But if you guys like me love to eat up every detail of a case that fascinates you, you probably race to Google to find everything you can on the story. I do that all the time, and the bulk of the newspaper articles about this case date to the spring of 2014. So that's all I'll say about that, but I wanted to at least make you aware that there are some discrepancies, and I noticed. But for purposes of this video, I'm going to start the story in October 2010. So, in October 2010, a lady named Anita Friend was an attractive, recently divorced woman in her mid-40s. Now, Anita had been married for 18 years, so this was the first time since her divorce from Mr. Friend that she had lived alone in a long time. Her best friend, Dee, suggested that Anita, who went by Nita or Neats, moved to an empty unit in the apartment community where she, Dee, the friend of Ms. Friend, lived in Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. Okay, let's pause here for a second. Something keeps nagging at me and it's a little distracting. Anita's name. It's a pretty name, it's a feminine name, and it's also a great drag queen name. Tiffany Lamp, Rita Story, Anita Friend, totally works. Anyway, moving on. So best friend Dee talked Anita into moving to Canonsburg, which is a city approximately 22 miles from my hometown of Pittsburgh. And I think it's worth mentioning that Dee often teased Anita for being a country girl and branded her a snob for writing off the city neighbors as strange. Trust me, they were definitely out there. But for reference, Pittsburgh is located in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, and according to the Census Bureau, the population of Pittsburgh as of April 1, 2010 was 305,704 people. It's classified as a medium city, but having lived there all my life until recently, I describe it as kind of a big small town, if that makes sense. Now, Canonsburg is a city in neighboring Washington County, and in 2010, it had a population of 8,992 people. Again, around 9,000 folks in Canonsburg and 300,000 folks in Pittsburgh. So if Dee considers Anita to be a country girl who has moved to the city of Canonsburg, Anita must have come from a really small place in the sticks, since Canonsburg is probably not in any way large by most people's standards. But again, we're working with the premise that Anita signed a one-year lease in Dee's apartment complex back in the fall of 2010. So, pretty much as soon as Anita moved in, she noticed a few things. First, that the landlord was really accommodating and attentive to her and her friend Dee. He seemed to stop by a lot. And second, that most of the neighbors seemed significantly older and, to use her word, strange. She actually described these people as frail and resembling the walking dead. But she was willing to be a good neighbor even to the zombie community, so she politely introduced herself to the lady next door and was a little put off when the woman turned on her heel and slammed her door shut. Not a very nice welcome to the neighborhood, but maybe she was hoping for Jason Momoa. We don't know. Another neighbor, who might best be described as a nosy Karen with binoculars, started shrieking and hollering at Anita when she greeted her with a simple hello. Like I said, strange. But Anita was pretty excited to be living in a new place and really embraced this new chapter in her life. She was able to write off the weird neighbors, most of whom seemed to shuffle around the complex in a slow, kind of labored way, like zombies. In fact, she and Dee would regularly meet out in front of the building for their own little happy hour and sort of, watch the neighbors' live interactive freak show. Anita was grateful to have her friend there, since she was convinced they didn't fit in with the zombies. The one thing Anita had trouble writing off, at least at first, was the disappearance of her sleeping pills from her medicine cabinet. She was certain she had just filled the prescription and knew the bottle should be full, but it was almost empty. She kind of shrugged it off, I mean, think about it. You're married to the same guy for 18 years, and now you're out on your own in a really strange place with really odd people. You've signed a 1-year lease, so you can't just pick up and leave. So it would make sense that you'd be in denial about the missing medication. It would just be so much easier to pretend you hadn't noticed. Now that leads us to the next big change for Anita, romance. Our Ms. Friend was not interested in dating or starting any sort of romance, but a guy at work, whose name was Ray, by the way, had been persistently asking her out. So once she settled in after the move, she finally relented and said she'd go out to dinner with him, but she wasn't interested in anything further. As it turns out, though, Anita and Ray did actually go on a few dates, and they started to get pretty serious. But wait, I feel like I'm getting a little bogged down in the details and the choppy timeline. So let's just jump ahead a little bit. Anita and Ray are together. The neighbors are even wackier. Anita felt like they didn't belong there, blah, blah, blah. So sometime after the holidays, Anita and Dee were doing laundry at Anita's place when Dee mentioned that some of her underwear was missing. Lots of underwear, just purchased. Ooh, that's big time creepy. Anyway, they didn't want to go there, but the only thing that made sense to them at the time was that the landlord was a little sus. He must be coming in when they weren't home, since he was the only one they knew of who had keys to both their apartments. Now, I'm not sure I would have exactly accused the guy to his face, but that sounds like just what Anita did. At first, he was all indignant and pissed off, and then he was apologetic. He swore it wasn't him. He was never in her apartment without notifying her. But he did give her permission to change all her locks right away to make her feel safer and increase her comfort level about living there. So she did, or should I say Ray did, and as far as we know, Anita was the only one at that time with the new keys. Now, I've never heard mention of Dee changing her locks, but from my understanding, she had done her laundry in Anita's unit, not in a community laundry room. So they both assumed this new lock situation was a win-win, problem solved. But it wasn't problem solved for Ray. He started spending the night to make sure nobody was creeping around, and by spring, it looked like the pill and panty thief had moved on. But things were definitely not normal. Anita started getting sick, and her face was beginning to age practically overnight. Worse, her friend Dee was slipping too, carrying on loud, two-way conversations with an empty chair and looking like she was jacked up on drugs. Anita was more scared than ever, so she and Ray decided to just lay low and keep to themselves. By summer, an energetic young family, mom, dad, 2 kids, 2 dogs, moved into the neighborhood. They certainly stood out among the other residents, and Anita was hopeful things were on the upswing. But you guessed it, no upswing. One night when she was home alone, Anita heard the lady next door screaming threats at someone. She was threatening to kill whoever the mysterious offender was, and she carried on this tirade for what seemed like an eternity. Now, I'm a total chicken shit, for real, so if that were me, I guess I would change my soiled granny panties and just barricade myself in the apartment until the sun came up. I certainly wouldn't go skulking around in the middle of the night in my bathrobe by myself like some middle-aged Nancy Drew to confront my proven unstable neighbor. But we already know Anita isn't me. So what did she do? Does she call 911? Nope. Does she lock her doors and hide in the closet? Of course she doesn't. Instead, she does head out by herself in her bathrobe and ventures over to the neighbors. The hollering continues with each advancing step, and she hears stuff like, "I'm going to kill you, and one more word out of you and you're dead." So instead of running back home and, I don't know, grabbing a cast iron skillet or a steak knife at the very least, Anita peers through the slats of the privacy fence. And then, like that dumb horror movie heroine who runs up to the roof to escape the crazed killer, she opens the gate. She had to know who the woman was screaming at. Turns out, it was her dog. The lady was threatening to kill the dog if he uttered one more word. But don't worry, the dog was fine. Apparently he was a Labrador or a poodle because he had the intelligence to not say another word. But Anita was even more paranoid and on edge than ever. The break-ins to her unit started up again. Dee was becoming more and more like the locals, and Anita was suffering from a whole host of weird ailments that her doctors couldn't identify. So it was with mixed feelings that she said goodbye to Dee, who, after talking her into moving to this wacky place to begin with, had just announced that she was moving out. She had decided to live elsewhere with her boyfriend. Anita was happy for her friend, but now she was pretty much alone there. Well, except for Ray, he doted on her, and he was the only thing that made her feel safe. So it was around that time that he moved in, even though he thought she was making too much of the neighbor's odd behavior and accused her of being paranoid. Ray continued to go to work, but Anita couldn't work anymore. She began to suffer physical manifestations that she couldn't control or explain. Her shoulder-length blonde hair would fall out in clumps. The capillaries around her eyes were broken for no reason, and both legs were covered in huge, itchy, scaly sores. She had become one of the walking dead. And, almost as scary, so had the lively new family across the street. They were still outside a lot, but instead of playing, the kids were crying or screaming all day long. The parents screamed too, and everyone, including Anita, seemed to be in some sort of intense, uncontrollable pain. Anita felt herself becoming weaker by the day, and she experienced a kind of lingering brain fog. But she had spurts of clarity and the determination to once and for all figure out what was happening and why. But what could it be? Were they all being poisoned? And if they were, who could be doing it? Dee had been completely healthy and normal when Anita moved there, and now she was gone. The happy young family had just moved in, so what could possibly have taken all of them over so fast? And now Ray. He would have these sudden bursts of anger and rage that scared her. Now it appeared to be happening to him too. Or maybe not. Maybe he was just feeding off her anxiety. She was always lethargic, yet somehow still overly edgy, like a feral cat in a room full of rockers. One possible answer came to Anita over her morning Folgers, the coffee Ray brewed every day before work. Today it tasted funny. Strange funny. It tasted like bug spray. She spit out the coffee and wiped her lips with the back of her hand. Oh my God, it had to be Ray. Anita was totally freaked out. It was Ray. He was poisoning her. It had to be him, right? That's the only thing that made sense to her. Anita had to get this dangerous guy out of her house. But wait, I know what you're thinking. It's the same thing I'm thinking. It can't be Ray. There's no way. Good old Ray who wooed her for months, worried about her safety, cared for her when she was sick. How could it be him? This all started before he got there. The neighbors were wacky the day she moved in, and she hadn't even started dating him yet. But again, Dee was normal back then. And the landlord, while a little too friendly and possibly a panty snatcher, didn't seem to have any zombie symptoms. So maybe he was doing something. Or he and Dee both were. But what? And how? Okay, now I'm thinking back to the beginning, when Ray was relentless in his pursuit to start a relationship with the newly divorced Anita Friend. What if he followed her home one night, decided to maybe scare the living shit out of her and sent her racing into his strong protective arms? He could have done something to the neighbors. Maybe he decided to leave Anita and her pal Dee alone for a while, exempting them from his poison game. But everyone else was fair game. That's not totally unbelievable, right? I mean, it could happen, maybe. But by this point, Anita was too sick, too weak, too exhausted to figure it out. So she waited for Ray to go to work. Once Anita saw Ray pull out of the driveway, she locked all the doors. She called him and told him to stay away and don't come back. Of course, he argued with her. He would never hurt her. He loved her. But Anita couldn't believe him. She just knew it had to be him. And he must have been that dangerous, rageful guy all along. He continued to call, and email, and text. Anita saved hundreds of text messages that she would ultimately turn over to the authorities. Ray swearing it wasn't him, begging to come home, and pleading with her to help him. He was sick too, he said. He called and called, begged and pleaded. She'd see him drive past her house, so she covered all the windows with hefty bags. She came home one day to find her bedroom ransacked and jewelry missing. It had to be Ray. Only he knew where she kept these things. She filed a restraining order. The police issued a bolo, be on the lookout, and said they would patrol the neighborhood. But nothing really changed. So she waited for him. She sat on the floor near the bedroom door with a gun, waiting to shoot him. On the fourth night, she heard pounding on the front door. She gripped the gun. Then the phone rang. It startled her. But it wasn't Ray. It was the Canonsburg police. They had picked him up as he was leaving the hospital. He had sent Anita pictures of himself in a hospital bed with an IV in his arm. He swore he was dying, about to take his last breath, he said. The police believed he had been poisoning Anita and himself. They transported him to the Washington County Jail and charged him with violation of a restraining order. He was ultimately found guilty and held over on charges of stalking and harassment. Anita breathed a sigh of relief, hoping she would never hear from Ray again. But that didn't fix much of anything. Her health continued to rapidly decline. She was still sick. She was still aging and frail. She was still being poisoned. One night, when she was literally too weak to get out of bed, she got a call from Ray from the Washington County Correctional Facility. He begged her to not hang up. He'd figured it out. No, he actually did figure it out. Do you have any guesses? I did not. It was the water. Ray was better now because he wasn't drinking the water. He made Anita promise that she wouldn't either. All at once, the horrific truth hit her square in the face. She realized it wasn't Ray after all. He did love her. She had doubted his love, turned her back on him when he really was sick, being poisoned just like her, just like Dee, and just like the zombies. Anita begged his forgiveness, but she didn't have to. Ray had already forgiven her. He assured her it wasn't her fault. She promised to get him out, no matter what it took and no matter how long it took. She would right this wrong and get him freed from jail. It wasn't easy, though. You can't just call the warden and say, "Oops, my bad. Can you just let him out now, please?" There were formal procedures and legal channels. But first, she had to reclaim her health. She continued to live in her apartment, but she only drank filtered and bottled water. She was careful about bathing, food prep, ice cubes, everything. And her efforts worked. Little by little, she got better and stronger. And Ray got better too, waiting for the day they would be reunited. Meantime, while the wheels of justice slowly turned, Anita had to get to the bottom of the poisoned water. She discovered that just 50 feet away from her apartment on the other side of a fence was an enormous old industrial plant. She had to learn what was in that plant. Anita's research revealed that it was the site of a former uranium mine, and at the end of World War II, they began manufacturing industrial transformers there. The cause of the toxins turned out to be polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs. These are compounds that are produced by replacing hydrogen in biphenyl with chlorine. All transformers made before 1975 contained high levels of PCB. Okay, now I really wish I'd paid attention in science class. Anyway, PCBs are generally odorless, and when the transformers went bad, the workers would drain off the oil and dump it into nearby Chartiers Creek. That creek fed into the Monongahela River, which was the source of the community's water supply. Now, you would think that once Anita called the water company and reported the toxins, she would be lauded as the next Erin Brockovich with a big-time Oscar-winning movie written about her. But nope, that's not how it played out at all. The water company politely explained that they were only responsible for what they put in the water, not what was already in it. That led Anita to the Department of Environmental Protection, or the DEP. They listened, claimed to investigate, but as of the time of this story, nothing much has really been done. So what do we know? PCBs were responsible for all the strange behaviors in the neighborhood, including Anita's paranoia about Ray. Anita has retained dozens of critical reports, studies, and documents that back this up. The toxic substances cause psychosis, hallucinations, paranoia, physical ailments, and severe pain. So at this point, Anita can now see that much of what was happening was all due to the PCB's effects on her own body and mind. But she is sure that the break-ins were real, and that matter was never resolved. The investigation is ongoing. Meantime, Dee and Anita are still in touch, and Anita stayed in the apartment and continues to filter her water. So that leaves Ray. On November 13th, 2014, Ray was released from the county jail. He returned to Canonsburg to live with Anita, who surprised him with a marriage proposal. He said yes, and recent updates indicate that they now share Ray's surname and the same address. And while Anita may still be a friend to many, she's no longer trucking around with a drag queen name. Hey, check it out, a true crime story where nobody dies. And they lived happily ever after. So guys, that's it for me today. If you're still with me and you listened to the end, I want to say thank you. As I mentioned earlier, this is my very first true crime video, and I know I'm just kind of feeling my way and getting my footing, especially with the editing part. And I gotta tell you, it's weird, hearing the sound of your own voice for like 30 minutes. But we're all here because we love a juicy, suspenseful story, and I promise I'll work at getting better at telling them. Meantime, I would love to know your thoughts about Anita's wacky living situation. I mean, what were you thinking as we moved along in the twisty tale? Did you think Ray was poisoning her? Did you think they were all aliens or what? I was totally confused, so I genuinely want to know your theories. And if you're willing to leave me a comment and click like, it will really help my channel grow. And if you're willing to subscribe, you'll be my new bestie. For now, at least, my schedule is a little flexible, but I plan to upload a new story every Tuesday, a regular True Crime Tuesday thing. Then on Friday or Saturday, I'll upload other stuff. I don't know, maybe my weight loss frustrations. I could certainly fill a whole video with that. Or maybe a new smoothie recipe. I'm no Becky Homecki, but since being shut in for most of the past year, I've gotten pretty good at making healthy, protein-rich smoothies. Then again, Saturdays could also bring an old school what's in my bag video, or even original fiction or poetry. We'll figure it out together. So again, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you next time. Scary Clary out.